So, okay, so it's time for the segment that me and Ricky have. It's our Westworld recap of episode 9. So, spoiler warning, if you have not watched episode 9 or have not watched this season. So, episode 9, Vanishing Point. It was the penultimate episode. And if you watch any HBO show, you know that episode 9 is usually the one where a lot of shit goes down, so to speak. All right, Ricky. Let's start off just your overall take. You don't have to get into specifics just yet. Overall take on episode 9, Vanishing Point.
So overall take, slightly disappointed. I think that if you get on Sunday on HBO, and if the runtime for episode 10 is anything less than 90 minutes, it's probably going to not wrap up all the loose points there are or loose ends there are in the series, because I think that there's a lot to be left to be explained. Episode 9, in my opinion, did not really move. It moved the plot forward, I'll say, incrementally. Right. But good story. It was a good story. William's backstory was good. It was good storytelling. It just didn't really do what I wanted it to do for the plot.
Right. I understand what you're saying. It's kind of in a moment where, and we'll get into this, where the goal of the whole season is to get to the valley beyond. Now we know it's called the Forge, and it's kind of like taking its slow steps on getting there. But I think the show has done a lot of good work in providing backstory for certain characters, and kind of, especially in this past episode, and we'll get into it, the backstory of William, otherwise known as Man in Black. So I got a couple bullet points that we're going to go over from the episode 9, Vanishing Point. The first one is the really cool chat between Ford and Maeve. This obviously comes after Bernard kind of drops off Ford to Maeve while she's on the operating table. Ricky, what do you think of the chat between Ford and Maeve?
I thought that was a really cool scene. I thought it was shot really well. I think it's interesting that in the course of maybe the last, really they've hit it hard the last 2 episodes. It's kind of been a subplot the entire season, but Dolores has went from being, I think, what everyone thought was your like hero and character that you were going to root for and that was going to unlock this whole thing and kind of win the show, quote unquote. That's really flipped, and I think Maeve has turned into that character. And Dolores is referred to as the Death Bringer in episode 8. Now in episode 9, Ford comes in and basically says that Maeve was his favorite, and that he wanted her to get out more than any of them. So I thought it was a cool scene. Yeah,
I really liked it because anytime you can see Anthony Hopkins is a treat. I mean, we've all seen Silence of the Lambs, so he kind of holds a special meaning for me. And he has such an essence that he gives off when he speaks. He has got that great accent. And he was speaking to Maeve, about her, like the host being his children. And it's so hard for him to see them die. And he kind of talked about how he was there to save her. So he kind of gave her the power to alter her code. So, and we'll get into this in the scene for the next episode. Maeve is out of the lab and doing stuff. So obviously she gets out, but that whole scene about him talking about her as a child and his favorite host, I thought that was really interesting too. And I think definitely Maeve has become the hero of the story. Like you said, and Dolores kind of being the anti-hero at this point. And I think last year, Maeve didn't have a lot of work to do. She kind of towards the end of the season, she gained some steam, but I think definitely this season, she is the real leader in the pack. And Tandy Newton is a great actress and really done a lot with that role. All right, the next kind of scene that happened was Bernard and Elsie are driving, and Bernard ends up ditching both Ford from his mind, from his code, and ditches Elsie. So, Ricky, what do you think this means for Bernard as a character?
I think it was kind of the show's way of telling us that Bernard has reached consciousness, that he is making decisions upon his own free will. I think that even Ford alludes to that when he's in his head and basically says, Bernard's like, why are you making, and I'm paraphrasing this entire thing, but Bernard's like, why are you making me do these things? And Ford basically says back to him, well, I'm not making you do anything. I'm merely suggesting what you do, what you ultimately, the actions you take are your own. And then we see a cool moment where Bernard finally deletes Ford from his head and decides to leave Elsie behind, which I think was a very human thing to do, to kind of protect her, and is heading off to the Valley Beyond. So I thought it was Bernard's kind of peak, I'll say, to the entire season of gaining this quote unquote consciousness and kind of making his own choices instead of having Ford lead him around and make them for him. So
yeah, I think that's key, because if we think back to last season, Maeve, Ford had written her to leave Westworld, but she made the choice to get off the train and stay to find her daughter. And that's kind of where we thought Maeve had finally gained consciousness. And the same right, Bernard does the same thing, where he stops following Ford and he's like, I don't want you here anymore. I'm making this choice. And maybe that's where he actually gains consciousness. Now, in that same light, we think of Dolores. Is she conscious, or is she still following a path that Ford had written for? What do you think, Rick?
I think that if we look back, I think maybe her point's going to be this episode as well, but when Teddy basically kills himself. And I think she was, I guess she was conscious, but so driven to a particular goal that she thought she had to achieve that it seemed as if she really wasn't making the choices. But I think that's just when, I mean, we've all gotten into that point where you're so laser focused on something you believe in so much that you lose sight of everything else. So I think that she's been conscious since the last episode of season 1. I think that this scene with Teddy and losing Teddy and realizing the actions that she's done and the consequences of those actions, I think that's what will wake her up, quote unquote.
Okay, so you brought it up. The scene with Teddy and Dolores, they're in their horses. They get close to the valley. They're not quite there. They stop at kind of like a barn that's in ill repair. And Teddy basically just lays it out to her and says, you've changed me. I don't like what I've become. And I said I'd always protect you and I'd stay alive to protect you, but he doesn't, he like apologizes to her and he can't protect her anymore. So he kills himself because he's not the same person anymore. And that's when we see Dolores kind of lose it. And that's her true human emotion. And I think you're right. I think that that may be the point where she stopped maybe being led subconsciously and has become conscious, because she now knows what it's like to lose someone, right? She didn't really have a connection with anyone else in the park, but Teddy has always been there, and Teddy was kind of her rock. And I don't think she was aware of when she first changed Teddy how much he meant to her. And now she's kind of on her own, and she doesn't have anyone else to lean on. She's by herself. Her horde was killed by Ghost Nation. So I think this is where we really see what Dolores is made of, what her ultimate goals are, and whether or not she still believes in the same thing.
Well, and I think that, that goes back to the first episode of this season. If you remember the very first scene, it opens up with Dolores and Bernard talking, and Dolores, it's, like everyone now is considering that to be Dolores is leading Bernard and trying to see if he's awoke. But Bernard says, something about being real, and then Dolores asks him, and he says, what is real? And Bernard's response is, that which cannot be replaced. And then you see Teddy, which now the cradle's gone, so supposedly these hosts can't be just reset. So Teddy is gone, presumably for the rest of the show, or his life, or Dolores's life, or whatever. So it's now she's experiencing what is real, right? That Teddy can't be replaced. It's over.
And I will bring back up, I think it was episode 1 where it's the team that comes to Westworld to kind of like figure out what the hell happened. They find Teddy floating in the water. So Teddy is dead at the end. Now, what that means, we have no idea. This is Westworld we're talking about. So we shall see. Okay, so we'll spend the last couple points talking about the Man in Black. And he really went on a journey this episode. We started with his backstory. Kind of is set up with a scene where his wife, we meet his wife for the first time. We meet Grace back in their element. wherever they are. It doesn't really say where they're at. There's some sort of celebration going on for the Man in Black, and we kind of see him and his wife's relationship. His wife kind of makes it out that he's a fake, he's a fraud, he's been lying to everyone about his true nature, and we see her ultimate death. Now, this is after we find out that she finds this little card that Ford had given the Man in Black, or William, as he likes to be called, about his experiences in the park. His wife sees that. She can't kind of understand like why he's this sadistic murderer when he's in Westworld, and she kills himself. Ricky, what did you think of that whole flashback sequence?
I thought that, so my disappointment in this episode was strictly on just, I thought there's a lot to get to in the plot, and they spent a lot of time on the story. Now, the story itself, I thought was fantastically done. In terms of the I guess this backstory, it's really just the story of what happened that night. It really sums up William's character, right? So he tells his wife when he thinks that she's sleeping that he doesn't belong to her and he doesn't belong to this world. He belongs to Westworld. So a lot of people are taking that as either is he a host and that's what he's meaning, or is it just meaning that he no longer finds this world to be his and that he would rather exist in Westworld than the real world, which is what I'm leaning towards. I thought that it was pretty tragic, obviously his wife committing suicide, the guilt that his daughter had to carry, and ultimately, ripping that family apart. So I thought it shed a lot of light. I don't know that it really revealed anything about William that we didn't already know. I think that we knew William was a sadistic killer in Westworld. I think that they did a good job last season explaining young William and how he got to that point. So it was a good story, but I would be interested to get your thoughts on if you really felt that was necessary. I mean, I think we kind of knew that about William already.
Yeah, I don't think it did anything necessarily for William. I was kind of interested in his wife. Like, what was her deal? What was she like? We know that she was the daughter of Delos himself, or the owner of, and that's where it got William the inn at the company. We didn't really know anything about Grace. And I think it kind of shed some light on why his wife committed suicide, maybe what his headspace was. I'm always interested to know, especially in Westworld, like, what is the outside world like? We've only seen it a couple times, like what's going on out there. But it was interesting because we got to see Ford again in a scene with the Man in Black, and we got to see how they record everyone. They put everyone's digital profile on a little card. So we did get to see that, and we got to see how his wife, being distraught, left a card for Grace to find in like this little music box. So I think that was good, but we didn't really learn anything about the Man in Black. We learned a little bit about Grace, about her feelings, about how she hated her mother. She thought her mother was the problem, but in the end, she ended up hating her father for kind of setting her mother on this path. And that kind of gets us into this next part where Grace confronts William, or the Man in Black, about it, and we kind of see where William kind of has a breakdown where he thinks Ford isn't everyone. He accuses Grace of being a host and Ford talking to him through Grace, or a host to Grace, I guess, and he loses it, and he accuses Grace, and he murders some Delos employees that try to rescue them, and he actually shoots Grace and kills because we don't know anyone's dead until we know they're dead on this show. And then he finds out afterwards that she probably was real because she was holding that Delos card that only she could have gotten from his wife, Juliet. So, Ricky, what do you think of that whole sequence? Did you expect him to shoot Grace like that?
I think that I was surprised that he shot her. I think it, is like the nature of this show, what you can't tell who's real and who's not real. It kind of draws some parallels to when Grace shot that guy in the original, earlier in the season or in whatever season one that was, when she wants to find out if he's a host or not. So she picks up the gun and shoots him to figure it out. So I thought that it was, kind of the typical problem they have in Westworld. I think William was suffering a psychotic break, didn't really know what was real, what wasn't, and he had convinced himself so much that she was fake or was a host that he felt comfortable doing that.
Right. So the whole question is like, what is his reality? Like when you're immersed in something, you question what your reality is. I mean, Ready Player One came out this past year, and it's kind of the same concept. When you're in something, what is real to you? What makes it real? And so we go on, he realizes he's killed his daughter. And I mean, so he knows he's responsible for his wife's death. Now he's responsible for his only child's death. And he walks into the desert or into this grass plain, and he pulls out his gun, and he kind of has some flashbacks about what is real. Am I real? And we finally get to scene that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Is William a host? He takes his blade out and he goes to cut open his arm. So in the next episode 10, we'll probably find that out. So Ricky, once again, based on what we saw in this episode, do we think he's a host?
I think that for the show and for my own, personal, what I want to happen is I hope he's not a host. I hope he's a human. I think if he's a host, that a lot of this just gets like explained away. It's like, oh, well, he only shot her because the pain almost isn't real. Right.
Right.
I think that's and that's almost like what I think Westworld struggles with a bit is this whole stakes. Game of Thrones is very good at that, right? Everything is after, when it's someone's dead, they're dead, right? The stakes are very high. Whereas Westworld, I think the stakes are just not there because everyone seems to be able to be revived and put into a different body or have their body repaired. So I hope he's a human because I think that makes the stakes feel much realer than if he's a host.
No, I definitely agree. I think the thing that people are losing and things I've read is like you're so concerned with is William a host thing. You forget that he literally just murdered his only child in cold blood because he was having a mental breakdown. I mean, that is horrific. And that is definitely something that you don't see every day on a television show. So I think looking forward to this next episode, I don't know how you feel, but I feel a lot of things need to be addressed. But we do know there's going to be a season 3, so we know not everything's going to be addressed. Ricky, real quickly, anything next episode that you want to see answered?
Yeah, I think I want to understand what the Forge is, what this Valley Beyond is. Is it a digital world like the Cradle? Is it a physical world? I think I want to understand where they're going to go with season 3, because that's also like a huge question I have. Is it going to take place in Westworld still? Is it going to take place in the real world? Like, what are they like? What's the next step for this show? Because I don't really, purposefully, right? It's meant to be a bit of a mystery, but I don't really know the direction that they can take this into season 3. I think if you get it out into the real world, that gets to be a very complicated just logistical issue for them of how they're going to shoot all these people out there. So I think that I'm interested to see kind of what this Valley Beyond is and how they're going to prep this for season 3.
Yeah, I definitely think there's going to be some sort of altercation between Maeve and Dolores and Akecheta if he's there. People are going to die. I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know who's on contract with HBO to be in next season, but definitely we're going to figure out what the Forge is, what's in there, and I don't know what we're going to see something happen. So I'm really looking.
But we kind of know the ending, right? Because that's what like the most furthest timeline out right. is Teddy on the beach, right? With Bernard. Bernard's there, and Bernard,
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I kind of forget about that, but we do know how part of it ends anyways, with everything being underwater. So we'll see. It should be pretty interesting going into Sunday. All right, so that's a pretty lengthy conversation on Westworld, but hey, it's a great show, so let's talk about it. I don't care what Tony thinks.
Three Guys Analyze is sponsored by KMC Artistry. Check the description to schedule your hair appointment today. Three Guys Analyze is also sponsored by Shortcut Lawn Care. Save time, save money with Shortcut. Read the description to set up your free estimate today.